everyone, and welcome to another episode of Story Stalking, a division of Dead to Rights, the podcast video for the crime genre industry. I'm your host, Donna Carrick. Before we get into today's story, which is a wonderful story by an exceptional author, Sylvia Maultash Warsh, titled None Shall Sleep, before we get to the story, I want to remind you about our Carrick Publishing anthology, a new Carrick crime anthology coming out this fall. October 31st, I think, is the tentative release date, titled A Grave Diagnosis, 35 stories of murder and malaise. And each of these stories is by a different author. Many of them are well known to you, and some are your favorites already. And there are a few new authors, as we always do, throw in just to get them some exposure. But they're all outstanding stories, and we're thrilled to bring them to you. Each story features a crime as well as an illness. And the title and the theme were determined before the COVID situation, unfortunately. So it's just quite accidental that it's appropriate to our times. Coming out again, October of 2020, A Grave Diagnosis, a Carrick crime anthology of 35 stories of murder and malaise. So look for that. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. And now I'm going to read to you None Shall Sleep by Sylvia Maultash Warsh, first appearing in the Key of 13, which was our anthology of murder and music by the Mesdames of Mayhem, Carrick Publishing, 2019. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. Please join me for None Shall Sleep. Akmola, Kazakhstan, 1950. Galina's mistake was to tell her understudy at the Moscow Opera a stupid little joke. She whispered in the girl's ear, "When we are finally paid our wages, I will splurge and spend it all on a tin of herring." Her understudy, recognizing the opportunity, relayed the conversation to the committee head, who informed the police. It turned out to be treason to imply that the government had not paid its artists in months, or that government-run stores were empty. Galina was sentenced to 5 years in a labor camp for anti-Soviet activity, while the understudy was promoted to Galina's role. Her mother and uncle wept when she was taken away. There was no one else left of her family. Her husband, a brilliant but unstable composer, had hanged himself 2 years earlier after a visit from the police who demanded that he write only music praising the virtues of Stalin. She traveled the nearly 2,000 miles from Moscow in bitter November, 4 days by rail, sleeping on the crowded floor of a boxcar surrounded by women, then standing for 3 hours in an open truck. She was nearly frozen when she arrived at the camp near the village of Akmola in northern Kazakhstan. All she could see was snow. It covered the barracks, the fields, and the woods beyond. White under the gray, brooding sky. Only barbed wire protruded through the snow. A guardhouse loomed above them. Galina was assigned to a work detail with other women, sawing logs felled in the forest. She dragged herself back to the camp every evening, exhausted and hungry. She still had her good looks, shiny black hair, green eyes, clear skin, unlike the women who had been there for months and grown haggard from the labor and the cold. The male guards stared insolently at her. One day she was taken from the forest where she was working and brought before Nikolai Petrov, the director of special inspections for the province. He was of average height and weight, with clipped mouse-brown hair receding from a high forehead. Unlike the rest of him, his eyes were extraordinary. They wanted things. They devoured people, searching to find what use he could make of them. To Galina's surprise, he asked her to sing an aria from Puccini's Turandot. Though Galina had performed it on stage in Moscow, her body was worn out from labor and malnourishment, and her body was her instrument. It wasn't her best delivery. Nonetheless, Petrov leaned forward, listening attentively while she sang. When she finished, he leveled his pale blue eyes at her. Not as good as the great Maria Zamboni, but it will do. You will come and sing for me when my duties bring me to the camp every fortnight. I need to relax at the end of the day. He tilted his head. You do not look pleased, Comrade Adamova. I will gladly sing for you, sir, as long as I can return to my barracks afterward. But you have not seen my suite. Plenty of food, much better than what you eat in the camp, and space. You lie like sardines in the barracks. I have a nice big bed. I appreciate the offer, sir, but I prefer to return to my friends at the barracks. I don't think you understand, comrade. I am asking you because I'm a gentleman. But if I want you to sing for me, you will sing. Of course, sir, only not, and you will do whatever else I ask. She still had some faith in the system, so she said, I will report you to the commandant. His pale eyes darkened. He jumped up from his seat and came at her with a wooden stave in his hand. She screamed out, but no one came to help her. The first blow knocked her off her feet. She covered her head with her hands as he smashed the stave down on her arms, her chest, her back. She curled up into a ball, but felt her flesh disintegrating beneath the contours of the stave. She spent the next 4 days in the camp hospital. Though she was battered and bleeding, Petrov had managed not to break any bones. Her bruised body looked like a horror show for 3 weeks. When the surface of her skin had healed, Petrov sent for her. This time, she knew better than to refuse. His suite was a palace compared to the rest of the camp, with a leather sofa, bookshelves, and an oak desk in the front room. In the bedroom, he offered her apples and dates on a plate. She took nothing. In front of the massive feather bed, she sang the aria, Tu che di gel sei cinta, or You who are girdled with ice, the servant girl's song under torture. Though Galina's voice was a shadow of its former self, her pain gave it depth. Petrov lay on the bed and drank vodka from a bottle, stared at her with his devouring eyes. Then he switched on a turntable beside the bed and played a recording of Nessun Dorma, or None Shall Sleep, by Francesco Merli. During the tenor's aria, Petrov forced himself on her. The aria and Petrov concluded with the resounding repetitions of Vincero, Vincero, I will win. Her life changed after that. Every 2 weeks, Galina entered his suite and sang the same aria, and every 2 weeks he violated her during the crescendo of Vincero. During those nights, her spirit emptied out of her. Her body could not escape, but her essence, the kernel that was her, flew out the window into the freezing dark. She felt nothing. She was reassigned from the forest to the sewing shop. She had never used a sewing machine, and one of the other prisoners, a tall, sturdy woman named Nadia, took pity on her, showing her how to handle the fabric and thread the machine. Another woman expressed indignation that Galina had landed among them after prostituting herself to Petrov. Look at her, new boots, new jacket. Were they worth it? Galina wrenched off the padded jacket and threw it at the woman. Shut up, Nadia said. You're just jealous he doesn't want you. She pulled the jacket from the woman before she could put it on and returned it to Galina. The other woman scowled but turned away. After sneaking out of Petrov's bed, Galina would stuff an apple, some dates, and rolls into her pockets and give them to Nadia as thanks. Nadia would sit on her bunk, her wide cheekbones moving as she chewed the treats. You would like my little brothers, she said wistfully. They were sent to Siberia, but maybe one day you'll meet them. Galina pictured 2 boys who looked like Nadia. Tell me again about the Turandot, Nadia said. Her friend was of good peasant stock, but Galina knew how keenly she felt her lack of education. The beautiful Chinese princess Turandot was betrayed by a man and wants never to marry. So she makes each suitor who comes for her hand answer 3 riddles. If they don't answer correctly, she has them beheaded. Nadia nodded in approval. Atta girl. Not the usual audience reaction. She caught Nadia staring at the red worm of a scar on her forearm, a souvenir of Petrov's rage. He had never beaten her again. He didn't have to. Galina went on. The foreign prince Kalaf falls in love with her and answers the riddles correctly. She begs her father, the emperor, not to make her marry him. The prince gives her a riddle in turn. Tell me my name before sunrise, and at dawn I will die. Turandot accepts. Heralds call out her command. 'Tis night, none shall sleep. All will die if the prince's name is not discovered by morning. Anticipating his victory, the prince sings Nessun Dorma, finishing with Vincero, I will win. Not a romantic at heart, Nadia couldn't understand why Turandot fell in love with the prince at the end. She should have killed him. Things would go better for her. Galina had once loved the story, the unlikely tangle of love and death. How could she have taken it so seriously? All the melodramatic deaths. Real death was ugly and final. The only thing that mattered was survival. She had survived, but at great cost. In Petrov's dresser mirror, she saw eyes that were empty. In 1953, Joseph Stalin died. An amnesty was immediately declared, but it took a year of authorities dithering, uncertain about the new dogma and paperwork, before 1 million non-political slave laborers were sent home. It took another year before political prisoners were set free. While they waited for their freedom, Nadia told Galina, I prayed every day for my little brothers in Siberia. Now they'll be coming home, and we'll be a family again. Galina made the long trek home to Moscow in 1955 to find that her mother had died 6 months earlier. Her uncle, still a staunch communist, had found work as an engineer in the Ministry of Industry and Trade. His faith in the old system was unintelligible to her now. The whole world was unintelligible to her now. Toronto, April 1979. Galina examined the white tulle bridal gown on the mannequin with a critical eye. She draped a swath of lace along the too low neckline on which the young bride had insisted. Oksana had tried on other gowns in the store, but had rejected them as too traditional or not tight enough. Galina had designed a custom dress for her after much discussion, Oksana picking and choosing features from photos. She was coming in for her first fitting tomorrow. After they finished her dress, Oksana would bring in her 4 bridesmaids, and the whole process would start over, this time with 4 determined girls arguing over what they wanted. Galina wondered how she had come to this, fabricating wedding gowns for spoiled young women who would have been her daughter's age if she had had a daughter. But in order to have a daughter, you need a man, and Galina had spent the last 25 years keeping a safe distance from men. She reflected with some irony that she had turned into the ice princess, Turandot, who refused all suitors. Her boss, Nadia Makarova, the owner of the shop, knew better than to try to fix her up with a date, unlike some of the well-meaning mothers of the brides. Nadia was the only one who knew about Nikolai Petrov and his arrangement with Galina. The 2 women had parted ways after leaving Akmola. Then 5 years later, after an exchange of letters, Nadia had offered to sponsor Galina to come to Toronto to work in the store. They had become close in the camp, and they trusted each other. In Toronto, Nadia told her the story of how she had emigrated to join her little brothers. Galina had always pictured them as tall young saplings from the protective way Nadia spoke of them. She had been the older sister, cooking cabbage rolls for them on the farm. So, the first time Galina set eyes on the little brothers, Sergei and Dmitri, her jaw dropped. They were tall, all right, but their waists were as thick as tree trunks, and their arms bulky, their necks like those of wrestlers. Their brown hair was crew-cut, making their heads look too small for their bodies. They greeted her politely, looking her over beneath their eyelashes. Nadia shook her head at them, signaling Galina was off limits. The brothers had helped Nadia establish the store, becoming silent partners. When Galina had asked what their occupations were, Nadia responded with vague cliches that they were in import-export and finance. Galina didn't care about their murky business dealings and never asked again. Nadia received regular injections of funds from a firm in the Soviet Union, more money than she made from dressmaking. It gave her the freedom to do what she loved. She set up a fancy store in Yorkville, the toniest neighborhood in Toronto, all in pristine white, with a crystal chandelier, velvety broadloom, rich cream walls. She loved to serve champagne to rich customers who would never guess her peasant background. Galina had jumped at the chance of a new start, since after leaving the camp, she had lost her voice. Not like someone loses a beloved hat or a glove on the bus. It had disappeared into her chest. Some cave had opened up in her heart and swallowed it whole. She had lost the only part of herself that mattered. Her voice had saved her in the camp, but she had sleepwalked through her life ever since. Maybe she should have died there. How did a woman whose body was her musical instrument live without music? Yet she couldn't bear to listen to it. It reminded her of what she had lost, herself. At 53, Galina was still a beautiful, slim woman, though unrecognizable from her younger self. Chin-length hair dyed blonde to hide the gray, permed into waves around her pixie face. Oversized glasses with a slight tint so people couldn't see her eyes. Galina glanced out the window while she waited for Oksana. A black limousine pulled up in front of the store on a swanky Cumberland Avenue. A stocky man in a black trench coat got out of the driver's side and stepped around to open the back door. Oksana climbed out. The car pulled away. Galina would probably never meet the fiancé. It was unlucky for him to see his future bride's wedding gown. Oksana bounced into the salon in stiletto heels and a tight flowered dress, the summit of her white breasts cresting above the low neckline. "How are you today, Miss Popova?" Galina took in the mass of platinum blonde hair reaching her shoulders. "I'm excited to try on my dress," she exclaimed, rubbing her perfectly manicured hands. But when Galina brought out the gown, Oksana said, "What is this thing on the top?" She flicked a red nail at the lacy cowl. "I thought it would soften the neck. It's only pinned on. If you don't like it, we can take it off." In the dressing room, Galina helped the girl struggle into the tight gown. The swath of lace along the neck was the only bit of fabric that didn't cling to her body suggestively. "Take it off. It hides my boobs. Andrea loves to see my boobs." Galina removed the pins and the lace. The girl had no class, yet she had snagged a rich husband, so what did Galina know? The pull of sex was strong in young men. Though the gown hugged all her curves, Oksana found places where the fabric could be tucked in further. Galina scheduled her for another fitting. 2 days later, Galina peeked through the window at the sound of a car screeching to a halt. A racing green Jaguar convertible had pulled up in front of the salon, Oksana in the passenger seat beside an older man. Was her father dropping her off? The man leaned over and kissed her on the mouth, not fatherly. Galina cringed. So this was the fiancé she needed to be sexy for, a 60-year-old man with scant gray hair and aviator sunglasses. Oksana coquettishly removed his sunglasses, revealing an ordinary face. But his eyes. It couldn't be. Those devouring eyes. Galina stumbled backward. She must be mistaken. The fiancé's name was Andrea, but years ago Nadia had heard a rumor about Petrov. Some important party bosses in Moscow were looking for him after he'd stolen the fortune they had amassed for themselves. Corruption was an open secret, yet they could hardly go public. Petrov had apparently fled the country, but the party bosses had a long reach. Galina assumed the information had come from Nadia's brothers, who seemed to have a pipeline to nefarious businesses back home. If Petrov was a wanted man, he could have come to a quiet city like Toronto, could have changed his name. Galina composed herself as Oksana stepped into the salon. While helping the girl into her dress, Galina asked casually, "Was that your fiancé who dropped you off?" "Yeah, Andrea loves that car." "How did you meet?" Galina didn't usually ask personal questions, so she followed up. "I ask all our customers that." "Oh, we met at a dance. You know, that hall on Steeles Avenue." She named a venue where Russian expats went to meet other Russian expats. "I'm a good dancer, and he saw me, picked me out right away." Galina forced a smile. "What does he do?" "He's a businessman, arranges mortgages and things." Oksana was admiring herself in the mirror. The mermaid dress, tight down to the hips, then flared, flattered her hourglass figure. "He's done well here," Galina said. "Your parents must be happy." She made a face. "My mother likes his money, but my father says he's too old for me." "Must be hard living at home." She waved her hand. "Oh no, I moved in with Andrea right away. He has a penthouse. Why should I stay at home in a tiny little bungalow?" Galina would look up the address Oksana had written down on the form all the brides filled out. "You need a veil," Galina said. She brought over a length of gauzy fabric and a strip of white satin. "I can make a headpiece for you." She arranged the satin into a semicircle and pinned it on the veil. "It will come down across the front of your hair like a princess." She placed the satin over Oksana's hair, the veil like a cloud behind. "We'll sew on crystals and pearls to make it pretty." Oksana smiled. "I love it." She took the gown home in an opaque garment bag that hid its secrets. Galina watched the fiancé lay it in the trunk of the Jaguar. She recognized the way his body moved, deliberately, with confidence, only a few pounds heavier after 25 years. She retreated to the office in the rear. Falling into a chair, she folded back the sleeve of her blouse. She wore only long sleeves, so she could avoid it, but now she searched out the red worm of a scar. It pulsated on her arm, relentless, dragging her back to Petrov's bed, the magnificent music, once nearly sacred to her, now polluted. She put her head down on the desk and wept. Nadia found her there. Galina struggled to get out the words, but finally Nadia understood. "You're sure it's him?" Galina nodded, her eyes swollen. Nadia picked up the phone and dialed. She spoke in Russian. "Yes, Nikolai Petrov." She waited during a response. "He's here in Toronto." She waited again. "Of course." Galina saw him. Nadia listened on the phone, nodding. Finally, she looked up at Galina and gave her a crooked smile. Galina painstakingly stitched crystals and pearls onto Oksana's headpiece. The next morning, she phoned the girl, offering to bring it to her home after work so she could try it on with her gown. Galina fidgeted the rest of that day, unable to concentrate. It was twilight when she pulled into the guest parking in front of the North Toronto apartment building. She trembled, carrying the headpiece in a garment bag over her arm. She had brought her large purse, heavier than usual. Inside the front door, she punched in the code Oksana had given her. The elevator slid up 15 floors and opened right into the penthouse, a high-ceilinged front hall with marble flooring. Oksana appeared in tight pants and a sweater, kissing her on both cheeks. She brought Galina into the vast living room where floor-to-ceiling windows looked into the night. becoming a mirror of the room. The building backed onto a ravine. Galina noted the balcony door. The fiancé sat on a white leather sofa, phone in hand. Galina held her breath. Andre, this is the wonderful dressmaker who made my gown, Miss Adamova. He nodded and waved from his seat, engaged on the phone. Galina understood. His fiancée's dress was of no consequence to him. A frivolous diversion. He had important business matters to deal with. He had no idea how important. Oksana led her into a bedroom with red drapes and a king-size bed cover with red silk. It looked like a brothel. The girl closed the door before pulling the wedding gown from the closet. Galina helped her on with the dress, then placed the spectacular headpiece over her hair. Oh, it's gorgeous, Oksana said, entranced with her image in the mirror. Galina had taken special care embroidering the piece, though she knew it would never be worn. After a few minutes, loud voices rose in the hall outside. Men were arguing. Oksana looked at Galina with alarm. Then the noise of a scuffle, someone falling heavily to the floor. Oksana covered her mouth with her hand. What's happening? She cried, stepping anxiously to the door. No, Galina said. You don't want him to see the dress. I'll look. She opened the door, took a step, then pulled back in quickly, closing the door. She shook her head ominously and whispered, Go into the bathroom. Lock the door. Don't let anyone in but me. Oksana's eyes widened in terror. Then she ran to the ensuite and locked herself in. Galina's heart leapt in her chest. She took a deep breath before walking out the door, carrying her purse. The yelling hadn't stopped. The brothers Makarov, Sergei, and Dmitri had Petrov pinned against the glass door of the balcony. He was bleeding from his nose and a cut above his eye. His expensive silk shirt was torn. He looked small beside the brothers' bulky chests. I'll give you money, as much as you want, he screamed. I have a lot of money. We know. The men you stole it from sent us. This is a mistake. You have the wrong man. My name is Andrei Zhadenko. Liar, Galina spat out. He turned his bloody face toward her. Who the hell are you? One of the brothers slapped his face. Respect! Petrov closed his eyes, then opened them, staring at her. You don't recognize me, do you? She took off her tinted glasses. He screwed up his eyes. I wasn't blonde then. He blinked. It was a long time ago, in Akamola. He gasped. Galina? She couldn't remember why she had been so terrified of him. Please, help me, he sputtered. Some men never learn. The brothers peered at her. They were waiting for her to give the word. She pulled a cassette player from her purse and turned on the tape. Pavarotti's immense voice began to sing Neshun Dorma. No one sang it so well. She hadn't listened to it or any other music for years. The sound expanded in the air, filled her with memories she had almost beaten back. Petrov's eyes grew wide. What are you doing? I helped you. Don't you remember? I saved you. She turned up the volume. The brothers looked at each other and smiled. The song was heading toward its climax when the prince vowed he would win the love of the ice princess, Turandot. Galina gave the brothers the agreed-upon nod. One husky man on each arm pulled Petrov away from the balcony door. They slid it open. Cool spring air rushed in. Petrov began to scream, Help! Someone help me! The music drowned out his voice. They dragged him onto the balcony. He kicked his feet against the concrete floor. She followed, noting the dark, moonless sky. They were high above the ravine, nothing but a black hole below. I'll give it all back. Let's go to the bank now and I'll transfer it all back. The brothers lifted him by the legs and held him over the edge of the balcony. Petrov howled, but the night swallowed up the sound. Pavarotti had come to the resounding climax, the B note sustained with heroic length. The first, Vincero. The brothers let Petrov slip a bit, as if they had trouble holding on. Galina closed her eyes, screaming out tears for the self she had lost in Akamola. The second, Vincero. She opened her eyes. The last, Vincero, Vincero. I will win, I will win. The brothers let go. Petrov screamed into the bottomless night. She held her breath, listening for more. But there was no more. The end. And that has been None Shall Sleep by the incredibly brilliant author, Sylvia Maultash Warsh. That story moves me every time I read it. I'm sorry if there were parts where it seemed like I couldn't read on. It is an incredibly moving story. So if you hear me say that Carrick Publishing and the Mesdames of Mayhem are associated with fine authors, now you know I'm not exaggerating. Please look up Sylvia Maultash's work, Sylvia Maultash Warsh, Warsh. She's got titles such as Find Me Again, The Queen of Unforgetting, To Die in Spring. Look for all these titles. They are absolutely brilliant. And look for all of her short stories in the Mesdames anthologies as well as Carrick anthologies. She's got one coming up in A Grave Diagnosis. I believe she also has stories in a number of other anthologies and magazines. She's a widely respected, and you can see why, author in the Toronto community. She has an exceptional personal history too. You can read about her online. And I want to thank Sylvia for this wonderful, wonderful story, None Shall Sleep. And thanks to all of you for joining us today on Story Stalking. We know that there are a number of ways you could spend your time, and we really appreciate you spending it here with us. And thanks also, as always, to Ted Carrick for the wonderful theme music, Eyes of Gold. And with that, I'll see you next week.
Dusty road, a man alone. His vital signs go on hold, and I don't know what you've been told, but the years have turned my eyes gold. And I told you what you told me, we'd never be in the same boat for free, yet it rides